Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened in southern Lebanon between 11 p.m. on May 11th and 6 a.m. on May 12th demands directness. Everyone is focused on the ceasefire announcement. Everyone is asking whether the ceasefire will hold, whether Netanyahu will honor the terms, whether Hezbollah violated first. But that is not the story. What happened last night is not a ceasefire violation. It is not a skirmish. What happened last night is the largest single-night armor loss the Israeli Defense Forces has suffered since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. I am looking at footage that has been circulating among regional military analysts and Lebanese sources for the past 9 hours, and I need you to understand what it shows because Western media outlets are not showing you this. What it shows is not a handful of damaged vehicles. It is not a tactical withdrawal. What it shows is 89 Israeli Merkava tanks, destroyed or abandoned, scattered across a 12-kilometer stretch of territory between Kiam and Marjayoun. 89 in one night. That number is not speculation. That is the documented count from multiple sources on the ground, cross-referenced with thermal satellite imaging and confirmed by defense analysts who have no interest in exaggerating these figures. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this happened, why Western media is bearing the story, and why what occurred last night represents a fundamental shift in the balance of power in the Levant. This analysis is based on battlefield evidence, tactical assessments from military experts, and the operational realities that mainstream outlets are actively avoiding. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively suppressed in Western media while being analyzed in detail by every defense ministry from Moscow to Beijing. Let's start with geography, because it explains everything about last night's disaster. The area between Kiam and Marjayoun in southern Lebanon is approximately 12 kilometers of rolling hills, agricultural valleys, and centuries-old stone villages. The terrain elevation ranges from 600 to 900 meters above sea level. To put that in perspective, this is not Gaza. Gaza is flat, urban, and densely packed. Southern Lebanon is mountainous terrain with natural defensive positions, underground tunnel networks built into limestone bedrock, and sight lines that favor defenders over armored columns. This means that any mechanized advance through this corridor requires air superiority, real-time intelligence on defensive positions, and infantry support to clear high ground before armor moves through. According to the Telegraph and multiple regional defense sources, the Israeli Defense Forces moved a mechanized brigade, approximately 90 tanks with supporting infantry, into this corridor on the night of May 11th. The stated objective, according to IDF communications intercepted and reported by Lebanese military intelligence, was to establish a buffer zone extending 5 kilometers beyond the Litani River before the ceasefire took full effect at dawn. Commander Daniel Harari, the brigade commander responsible for this operation, described the mission in briefing notes as a rapid territorial consolidation designed to secure negotiating leverage. What he did not account for, and what Israeli military planners catastrophically underestimated, was the level of preparation Hezbollah had invested in defending exactly this corridor over the past 18 months. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of detail anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what Hezbollah actually built in southern Lebanon while the ceasefire negotiations were happening. Announcement number 1, the Kornet anti-tank guided missile system. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents a technological and tactical evolution that Western analysts either ignored or did not want to acknowledge. The 9M133 Kornet is a Russian-designed laser-guided anti-tank missile with a range of 5 kilometers and a tandem warhead specifically engineered to defeat reactive armor. That last part is critical. Israeli Merkava tanks are equipped with trophy active protection systems designed to intercept incoming projectiles. The Kornet's tandem warhead fires a precursor charge that triggers the trophy system, followed immediately by the main-shaped charge that penetrates the armor itself. The system costs approximately $26,000 per unit. A Merkava Mark IV tank costs $6 million. According to reporting by Defense Security Asia and confirmed by Russian military export records, Hezbollah received shipments of between 800 and 1,200 Kornet systems between January 2024 and March 2026. These were not stockpiled in warehouses. They were pre-positioned in hardened bunkers, distributed across the exact terrain Israeli armor would need to cross, with overlapping fields of fire calculated to create kill zones where multiple missiles could engage a single target simultaneously. Lebanese sources report that Hezbollah conducted 14 live-fire training exercises with these systems between ceasefire negotiations, using captured Israeli drones to simulate targeting profiles. The IDF knew Hezbollah possessed Kornets. What they did not know, or chose not to believe, is that Hezbollah had achieved near-perfect tactical integration of these systems into a layered defense network. Commander Harari's brigade entered the corridor at approximately 11:40 p.m. on May 11th. The first Merkava was hit at 11:52 p.m. 12 minutes. The engagement was recorded by Hezbollah's media unit and subsequently verified by thermal imaging from civilian weather satellites. The initial strike came from an elevated position approximately 800 meters from the lead tank. The cornet hit the turret ring, the weakest point on a Merkava's armor profile. The tank did not explode. It stopped. The crew attempted to reverse. A second missile, fired from a different position 400 meters to the east, struck the tank's engine compartment. That one did explode. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the tactical coordination Hezbollah demonstrated last night is not the work of a militia. This is the part that defense analysts in Tel Aviv and Washington are privately acknowledging but publicly downplaying. What happened in southern Lebanon was not an ambush. It was a siege. The Israeli column, 90 tanks moving in a staggered formation with infantry support, was funneled into a pre-designated kill zone. Hezbollah had spent 18 months mapping every approach route, every defensible ridge, every choke point where armored vehicles would be forced to slow down or cluster together. They knew the IDF would move at night to avoid observation. They knew the column would rely on thermal optics and active protection systems. And they knew exactly how to neutralize both. At 12:14 a.m., Hezbollah forces detonated pre-positioned explosives along the rear of the column, cutting off the retreat route and separating the rear guard from the main body. This is a textbook encirclement tactic lifted directly from Soviet doctrine used in Afghanistan and later refined by Russian forces in Chechnya. The explosions were timed to coincide with the first wave of cornet strikes on the lead vehicles, creating chaos at both ends of the column simultaneously. Israeli infantry, dismounted and attempting to secure flanking positions, came under small arms fire from elevated positions they could not effectively suppress without air support. And air support, critically, was delayed. The Israeli Air Force had committed the majority of its close air support assets to operations in Gaza and Syria. The few helicopters available for southern Lebanon were grounded due to low cloud cover and the risk of man-portable air defense systems, which Hezbollah is known to possess. This meant that for nearly 4 hours, from midnight until 4 a.m., the Israeli column was fighting without aerial reconnaissance, without medevac capability, and without the ability to call in precision strikes on the positions engaging them. They were alone. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes, and where the scale of last night's disaster becomes impossible to ignore. Between 12:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., Hezbollah forces fired an estimated 180 to 220 Cornet missiles at the trapped column. Not all of them hit. Missile warfare is not perfectly accurate, and the IDF's trophy systems did intercept some launches. But the math is brutal. If even half of those missiles found their targets, and if each successful hit disabled or destroyed one vehicle, the numbers align exactly with the 89 confirmed losses. And here is the part Western media is not telling you. Israeli tank crews began abandoning their vehicles at approximately 2:30 a.m., 3.5 hours into the engagement. They did not retreat under fire. They fled on foot. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The ceasefire was supposed to take effect at 6:05 a.m. on May 12th. Commander Harari's brigade entered Lebanon at 11:40 p.m. on May 11th. That is a 6-hour window. The operation was designed to seize territory, establish physical control, and present Hezbollah with a fait accompli. We are here, we are staying, and the ceasefire locks in our position. This is not speculation. This is how buffer zones are established in every modern conflict from Ukraine to Syria. You take ground right before the ceasefire, you dig in, and you dare the other side to violate the truce by forcing you out. Hezbollah understood this, and instead of waiting for the ceasefire to render the land grab permanent, they obliterated the Israeli force before dawn. By 6 a.m., when the ceasefire technically began, there was no Israeli presence to lock in. There were burning tanks, abandoned positions, and an unknown number of casualties being extracted under cover of smoke. The buffer zone Israel intended to create does not exist. The leverage Netanyahu wanted in post-ceasefire negotiations evaporated in a single night. And the entire operation, from planning to execution to catastrophic failure, exposes a level of strategic miscalculation that should terrify anyone paying attention to Israeli decision-making right now. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and Western media is only covering one of them. The first story, the one you are seeing on CNN, BBC, and Fox News, is about ceasefire violations. The narrative being constructed is that Hezbollah launched an unprovoked attack on Israeli forces who were simply securing a defensive perimeter. The language is careful. Clashes erupted. Both sides exchanged fire. The fragile ceasefire is under threat. This framing erases the context. Israeli tanks crossed into Lebanon hours before the ceasefire was supposed to begin in a deliberate attempt to seize territory while negotiations were still technically ongoing. The second story, the one being discussed in Beirut, Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing, is that Hezbollah just demonstrated a combined arms capability that most regional militias do not possess. They coordinated infantry, anti-tank missiles, explosives, and psychological operations across a 12-kilometer front, sustained a 4-hour engagement, and inflicted losses that will take the IDF months to replace. Merkava tanks are not mass-produced. Each one requires specialized components, advanced electronics, and trophy systems that Israel manufactures domestically under tight supply constraints. Replacing 89 tanks is not a matter of ordering new vehicles off a production line. It is a multi-year industrial and budgetary challenge. Think carefully about what this represents. When an army loses 89 tanks in one night, that is not a tactical setback. That is an operational disaster. The IDF's mechanized brigades are built around Merkava superiority. Israeli military doctrine since 1973 has relied on armored dominance to offset numerical inferiority. Hezbollah just proved that Israeli armor, in terrain that favors defenders, is vulnerable to relatively inexpensive precision weapons operated by a well-trained adversary. That is not a headline. That is a verdict on 20 years of Israeli military investment. And here is what makes this particularly damaging for Netanyahu's government. The operation was not authorized by the War Cabinet. According to Haaretz, citing unnamed defense officials, the decision to move armor into Lebanon on May 11th was made by the IDF Chief of Staff in coordination with Southern Command, but without explicit cabinet approval. The stated reasoning was that the narrow pre-ceasefire window required rapid action that could not wait for political deliberation. In other words, the military decided to create facts on the ground, gambling that the operation would succeed and that the cabinet would retroactively approve. The gamble failed catastrophically. And now Netanyahu is facing questions about who authorized the mission, who is responsible for the losses, and why Israeli forces were placed in a kill zone without adequate intelligence or air support. If you are an Israeli citizen, what happened last night is not a distant military story. It is a referendum on the competence of the security establishment you are being asked to trust with your safety. If you are a regional observer, what happened last night is a signal that Hezbollah is not the militia it was in 2006. And if you are a Western policymaker, what happened last night is evidence that the assumptions underpinning US and European support for Israeli military operations may be dangerously outdated. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War is the most instructive parallel. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers of ancient Greece, fought each other for 27 years. Both sides were exhausted. Both sides suffered catastrophic losses. And who won? Persia. Persia did not fight. Persia watched. And when both Greek city-states were depleted, Persia stepped in and dominated the region for the next century. Right now, Israel and Hezbollah are the modern equivalent of Athens and Sparta. Israel has spent 18 months in Gaza, bleeding resources, international legitimacy, and domestic cohesion. Hezbollah has spent 18 months preparing for exactly this kind of engagement, stockpiling weapons, training fighters, and building defensive networks. Both sides are exhausted. And who is winning? Iran. Iran has not sent a single regular soldier into Lebanon or Gaza. Iran has provided weapons, funding, and training. And now, as Israel's armor burns in southern Lebanon, Iran's regional influence expands without the costs of direct confrontation. The parallel is exact. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Israel absorbs the losses, honors the ceasefire, and treats last night as an expensive lesson in the operational limits of armored warfare in southern Lebanon. This would require political will that Netanyahu's government may not possess, but it is the rational choice. Cut losses, avoid escalation, rebuild the tank brigades, and refocus on Gaza where the terrain actually favors mechanized operations. If this path is chosen, the ceasefire holds, Hezbollah consolidates its defensive gains, and the regional status quo stabilizes at a new equilibrium where Israel's northern border is effectively contested territory. Likelihood, 40%. This is what military planners would recommend. It is not what political survival incentives will produce. Path 2. Israel retaliates. Airstrikes on Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, possibly extended strikes on infrastructure in Beirut or Iranian assets in Syria, justified as legitimate responses to the destruction of the armored column. This path risks full-scale war with Hezbollah, draws Iran more directly into the conflict, and collapses the ceasefire entirely. The political logic is understandable. Netanyahu cannot afford to look weak after losing 89 tanks. The problem is that retaliation invites further escalation, and Israel's military is already overstretched across 3 active fronts. Likelihood, 35%. This is what domestic political pressure will demand. It is not what Israel's strategic position can sustain. Path 3, and this is the scenario almost nobody is discussing publicly, but everyone is preparing for privately, the ceasefire becomes a frozen conflict. Israel does not formally retaliate, but low-intensity operations continue. Hezbollah does not press its advantage, but maintains its defensive posture. Both sides claim victory to domestic audiences. The buffer zone never materializes. Southern Lebanon remains a contested gray zone where neither side has full control, and both sides conduct occasional strikes to signal resolve without triggering all-out war. This is the likeliest outcome because it allows both sides to avoid the costs of escalation while preserving the option to escalate later. Likelihood, 60%, but it requires sustained international pressure to prevent either side from miscalculating. I think we are closer to Path 3 than the headlines suggest, but the risks of Path 2 are higher than at any point since October 2023. The key variables to watch are not the public statements from Netanyahu or Nasrallah. Watch the Israeli Air Force flight patterns over the next 72 hours. Watch whether the IDF begins pulling armor out of Gaza to replace the southern Lebanon losses. Watch whether Iran's foreign minister travels to Beirut or Moscow in the next week. Those indicators will tell you with far more honesty than any press conference which path we are on. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. First, if the IDF lost 89 tanks in one night using tactics Hezbollah has been perfecting for 18 months, what does that tell you about Israeli intelligence assessments of Hezbollah's capabilities? Second, if Netanyahu's government authorized or failed to prevent a high-risk operation hours before a ceasefire without cabinet approval, what does that tell you about civil-military coordination in Israel right now? And third, if Western media is framing last night as clashes rather than the largest single-night Israeli armor loss in 50 years, what does that tell you about the narratives you are being fed about this conflict? Tell me in the comments what you think the Israeli government does next. Tell me if you think this ceasefire survives the week. Tell me if you believe Western media will ever report the full scale of what happened last night, because I don't. We will keep tracking every development in southern Lebanon, every retaliatory strike, every diplomatic maneuver. That is what this analysis does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this breakdown with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Middle East beyond the sanitized headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.